This morning, we're going to be in the second book of Samuel, chapter 7. And I'm going to read most of it, and then we're going to talk about it as we go. Because there's a lot of things that I did research on, and I found it's pretty amazing what I have learned. But before we get to this text, I want to kind of give you a little background of what chapter 7 is talking about here. First, we talked about last week, some of y'all were in the Bible study, some of y'all were not, but I like to go back a little bit to kind of explain what's going on here. It's like a movie, you ever watch a movie or a series, mostly a series, and they're like, next week, Tom's hanging off the cliff, and you're going to find out if he fell off. Next week, you keep tuned, He might stay on the cliff a little longer, you got to watch. They're kind of reminding you, like, he might be still on the cliff, So that's what you kind of do with the Bible. Most of them you're going through the whole Bible sometimes. Some people's in Bible study, some people's in different times. So it's always good to go back like a movie to kind of remember where you were. So last week, or the week before, in chapter 5, David unites the kingdom of Israel. It's actually called the monarch of Israel. It was actually Israel's golden age. Under the time of King David and King Solomon, it was actually Israel's golden age. Matter of fact, Israel still dreams of today of being that height. That was one of Israel's other greatest days in history. And they long for that day. They long. So the Antichrist, in the end time, the Antichrist is going to try to fulfill that. But it's their golden age. It was one of their greatest days. David is a fascinating character. David, you ever saw that movie, The Bad, the Good, and the Ugly? Well, that's how kind of David was. David, he had his good sides, but he also had his villain side. We have to admit, there were some days where his heart was for God and he followed God, but there were some days where David did his own thing, kind of like us. Let's be honest. Some days we follow God and some days we do our own thing. We mess up things. So David's a good example of God's grace as we get into the book. But anyway, David unites all of Israel. King Saul is dead. He unites. He becomes king of all Israel. He conquers Jerusalem. It's a Jebusite city. It was an independent city. It had no relationship to the Jewish people whatsoever. He did that so he can unite all the tribes, because each tribe was fighting against each other. And he's like, I want a neutral city where they're not going to fight each other. They're going to come to agreement. And so that's one of the reasons why he conquers Jerusalem. He made it a political city. At that time, they took it over to a shaft. They went through a water shaft. Matter of fact, they actually found it, the water shaft of King David. It was actually discovered. And so they went through the shaft and they overtook the city. And so David makes it a political capital, but in chapter 6, he makes it a spiritual capital. There was so much wars and there's so much things going on in Israel that they pretty much, the Ark of the Covenant was not even in its rightful place. It was actually in a house. It was not even in the tabernacle. It was not even in Shiloh no more. They had so much wars and so much things going on that even their religious structure was out of chaos because they had so much civil wars and things that were going on at that time. So David try to bring the Ark of the Covenant back. It's amazing how you think today we hear that separation of church and state. But back in those days, there was no such thing as separation of church and state back in those days. You had your political government, but you also had your religious, and they connected. If you study Babylonian, you study Egyptian, Egypt, you study through all these histories, they were together. So there was no such thing as separation of church and state back in those days. So David is trying to bring them both together. He's trying to make it also a spiritual capital. And we talked about how David took the ark. He meant well, he loved God, but his heart was in the right place, but the method he used was wrong. They were supposed to carry the Ark of the Covenant by poles, by the Levitical priesthood. But instead, he did what the Philistines did. He put it on a cart. And of course, the Philistines didn't know better, but Israel did. So God took that real serious. Israel should have known their Bible, and Israel should have took it like it was, like the way God said to do it. So anyway, David's heart was sincere, and a man dies because they're not in knowledge of God or what God says to do in the Old Testament. So like a lot of people today. Their heart's in the right place. They love God, but the methods they're using sometimes is wrong, and it leads to destruction. So that's a good way we can learn about it. Now here in chapter 7, there's actually, I call 2 plot points. And this is going to be pretty interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read most of the text, and then I'll come back to it and explain some things for y'all, if that's okay. All right. If y'all there, that'd be great. If y'all want to listen, that's fine. It says, now it came to pass when the king was dwelt in his house, the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies round about, that the king said to Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in the house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells inside a tent, curtains. Then Nathan said to the king, go, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. But it happened that night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, who you will build a house for me to dwell in. For I dwell in a house since the days that I brought the children of Israel from Egypt. From this day and has moved about in a tent, in a tabernacle, whatsoever I moved about with all the children of Israel, and I have spoken a word to everyone from the tribes of Israel, from where I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have not built me a house of cedar? Now therefore, thus says you to my servant David, thus says the Lord hosts, I have taken you from the sheepfold, from following sheep, to be rulers of my people over Israel. And I have been with you ever since you have gone and have cut off all your enemies before you. I have made you a great name, like the name of the great men who are on the earth. Moreover, I appointed a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, that they dwell in a place of their own, and move no more. Neither shall the sons of wickedness have passed around pass them anymore, possess them anymore. And since the day that I have commanded judges to be over my people Israel, I have caused you to rest from all your enemies. And also the Lord tells you to make me a house. And it says right here, when your days are fulfilled and you will rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who should come from your body. I will establish his kingdom, and he will build an house for me. Now, this is Solomon right here, because he's talking about Solomon right here. But watch. I will be his father, and he will be my son. And he commands the iniquity. I will chase him with the rod of men. And, of course, King Solomon did. He rebelled against God. Blow of the sons of men. My mercy shall not depart from him, and I will take it from Saul, whom I removed before you. Your house, your kingdom, shall be established. Now, I want y'all to remember this part, because this is going to be very important in verse 16. Your house and your kingdom shall be established forever, and your throne shall be established forever. According to all these words, according to all the visions, so Nathan spoke to David. All right, number one. David looks at his house, and he's like, wow, I have a beautiful house. Matter of fact, it was not even built in Israel, matter of fact. His materials for his house was actually built in Lebanon. The Tower of King actually gave him the materials to build his house. And, matter of fact, they actually found David's house. Matter of fact, when the woman who was the archaeologist that was searching for David's house, she said, look for cedar wood because it's not in Israel. And they said, that's how you will find King David's palace. And know it, they found it. Because she read this text and she realized, wow, David's house was made from another country. So that was a clue. So they found David's house. As a matter of fact, I was watching a documentary not too long ago. I believe it was not Syria at the time, but it was called Aram Damascus. It was a kingdom not far from Israel. And they attacked Israel a lot of times. And they found a tablet, a stone tablet, and it said the house of King David. And this was in Damascus. This was in the Syrian area we would call today. So they recognized that there was a dynasty of David. Even Israel's enemies knew that. So anyone who tells you that David was a mythical person, he was a fictional character, don't believe it, because the stones will cry out like Jesus said. So it's plainly the house of King David. So anyway, David's like, I want to honor God. His heart was in the right place. He said, I want to honor God, and I want to build him a house. Because it's not right that I have a nice house, and God is living in his point of view. He honored the tabernacle, but he said that I could do much better. I don't want God living in a shaggy type place. I want him to build a place of beauty. I want to build in a place of grandeur, and to honor the God of Israel, because other kingdoms, they build mighty temples to their gods, and why we can't build a monument to our God to glorify the God of Israel. So David's heart was in the right place. And Nathan was like, do whatever your heart tells you. Now, Nathan was not wrong, okay, because it was a great thing that David wanted to do. It was biblical, it was scripture, what David wanted to do. It was not wrong what David wanted to do. But the problem is with Nathan was that he was encouraging him, and it was a good thing. But God was like, hold on, fellas, there's something y'all got to know before y'all build this house. One thing he wanted to do was to remind David and Nathan the prophet, okay, guys, y'all don't know how big I am. When he says, why you want to build me a house of cedar? In other words, what he's saying is, guys, y'all cannot control me like these other false gods in these other nations. I'm not a little idol. I am not 468 or whatever. I am not a little idol where you can carry around, put in your house, and control me. I'm a big God.
That's right.
And I'm not like the other nations.
That's right.
And I mean, and you can't control me, and you can't tell me where can I go and where I can't. In other words, you cannot control me or capture me like a bird in a cage. You cannot. I'm not an animal. I'm not like in the zoo where you keep an animal in a cage and keep him there. I'm a big God. I'm a huge God. And I believe if David would have saw the technology we had today. Today you can go out there in space today. And if you ever take the time, go look. Space is huge. I mean, it blows your mind how big. And it grows every day, they said. Every inch of the day it grows. It gets bigger and bigger. So me and Dad was watching yesterday. They were showing the Earth. It was just a little speck of a little dot. Compared like to the whole universe and the planets, it was like this small. A little dot. So can you imagine? That's what God was telling David and them. I'm a big God. And this place, your temple you're building me, it won't contain me one way or another. It might contain some of me, some of my presence, but I can't live in this thing. I'm too big. I'm too powerful. I'm too large. You can't, so I honor what you did. Y'all want to build me a house, but at the same time, y'all don't respect or know who I am. I just can't be in this little place. Matter of fact, Solomon, when he built the temple and he donated the temple to God or offered it to God, he told the children of Israel, and when he was praying, he says, this place cannot contain you. He said, heaven of heavens cannot contain you. How can this little temple that I struck, me and my father made and planned all these years, how can I contain you in that place? Right. So God is a big God, and he's like, you can't contain me here in this place. Right. So a lot of times, I was about to get to that. See, Simon? Yeah, see? And I was about to say that, Brother Black. I'm glad you said something, because he said that. He says, the earth is my footstool and the heavens my throne. So if I can't contain these places can hardly contain me, how can this temple that you built can contain me? They actually said if the temple, Solomon, there was actually two temples. There was Solomon's temple, and then there was King Herod's temple. They said if neither two of these temples would have existed today, it would be one of the great wonders of the world. It would be right behind the pyramids of Egypt. It would have been not probably far from the Great China Wall if these two temples would have existed. And we have to remember, God dwelled in the tabernacle, and he dwelled in the temple for some time. But his desire was always to dwell in the temple. He always wanted to dwell in us. So yeah, God was like also letting them know, yes, I will be here for a little while. This will be my dwelling place in some ways, but my heart and desire is to dwell with men. Of course, before Christ made that atonement, God, that bridge was done. That bridge was open for us. Now we can come to God now. But before that, he had to dwell in the temple because he couldn't dwell at us before the payment was made on the Calvary. So, and another thing I want to point out too is that God promised David's dynasty. We talked about the temple. And I encourage y'all, if y'all want to know more about the temple, go do your research. Just go press Solomon's temple or King Herod's temple. And there's a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of things that can explain about the temple and, and how it was structured and why and stuff. So maybe one day we'll get some good internet over here one day and we can maybe do that one day. But for now, I encourage y'all to go to your house and do a little homework if y'all want to do that, if y'all are interested in that. That would be awesome for y'all to do that. But David's dynasty. God said, I will not take away from what I did with King Saul. Because David, I'm sure, was probably wondering, what if because that could happen back then. There was a lot of wars and, to destroy, another guy could have came in and destroyed David's dynasty and set up a new dynasty. That happened a lot back in those days. So I'm pretty sure God was letting David know for security. It's like, hey, the house of David will always continue, and I picked you and your house will remain forever. And guess who it will remain to? Jesus Christ. Did you know Joseph's side, I found out doing some research and it's pretty amazing. Did you know on Joseph's side of his family, he was related to David, to Solomon, to all that side of royalty. But Mary was also related to David on Nathan, one of David's sons called Nathan. So in other words, both individuals had royal blood in them of King David's dynasty in them. But of course, Joseph didn't really matter in blood-wise because Jesus came from his father. So Jesus never had an earthly father. But on Mary's side, the royal blood of David flowed to Christ on Mary's side of the family. So God's promise to David that his bloodline, his dynasty will continue to the day, to the present, until Christ comes back and set up his kingdom. The Jews are still waiting for this today. They're still waiting for that Messiah, David's ancestor. They're waiting for it. And of course, the Antichrist will come on the scene and he'll make a good picture. He will like, hey, I am the Messiah y'all been waiting for. I'm the one I'm gonna bring back your kingdom too. I'm gonna bring back the kingdom, the golden age. And, he's gonna promise them all this. And of course, we know how that's gonna turn out. It's gonna fail. But there's one thing though, that is also here is telling you of the future. He's like, hey, your son Solomon is gonna rule. He's gonna build a temple. He's guaranteeing that David's dreams will come true. Your temple will be rebuilt. Your sons will reign on the throne. And he said that Solomon will do it. And because Solomon was a man of peace, David was a man of war. So that's another reason why he could not build a temple. So God is guaranteeing him of that. And he's also saying that through the Messiah, through his reign, the bloodline will continue. And matter of fact, Jesus, if you look at Jesus's family tree, he was in line to be the next king, if you would think about it. In Israel's day, he would have been the perfect candidate to be king. He had the royal blood in him to be king, if the Jews at the time would have accepted him. But of course, they didn't. So Jesus is the direct line. Because if you notice, were you in Matthew? Or are you still in Matthew, Brother Bowen? Well, if you notice in the book of Matthew, Matthew was the Jewish book. See, Matthew wrote it to witness to his Jewish people. And if you notice in the book, he talks a lot about family tree. He talks mostly about David. The reason why he's doing that, because he's letting the Jews know that David was the son of David, if that makes any sense. David really was the bloodline. David was really of royalty. So because that really family tree played a big part in Israel. So Matthew was letting everybody know through this verse right here that David was really, or Jesus was the ancestor of David. And one day, God is going to bring back the glory days of Israel. If you read in the Bible, God told Abraham a certain land extent. He told him, says, your land will go up to the river Euphrates, all the way down to the border of Egypt. Israel never really, through David and Solomon, they conquered some of the promise, or half of the promise. But since then, after that, they never, even to this day, Israel never completely took in all the land. So one part, when it says that your enemies around you, remember we read earlier, when it says your enemies, that you will have peace around your enemies. In other words speaking, that fulfillment has not come true yet. Because Israel today is still surrounded by enemies more than ever, and is getting intense by the day. You know, Israel, so that part of prophecy has not been fulfilled yet. Right. Israel's still in war, and she's still in trouble right now. Right. So this is future. And then it's also letting know that Christ will come back in the future through David's line to set up a new kingdom. You know, after Armageddon, that's when all these prophecies are going to come. This is when all Israel, the covenant that God made with Israel, is going to be 100% complete when the battle of Armageddon. You know, the Antichrist is going to come. He's going to actually fulfill all the Muslims' dreams. He's going to actually almost wipe Israel off the face of the earth. He's going to come real close to what Hitler and other men tried. He'll come really close of doing it. And then the few that remain, the few that left from Jerusalem, they're going to finally call out to the Lord for deliverance, because nobody's there to protect them no more. They have no more allies. I mean, Israel's on his last leg. And then that's when they're going to call out for God for deliverance, and Christ is going to appear to them. And they're going to say, oh, what is these wounds in your hands and your feet? He said, I got them in the house of my friends. Yep, that's right. And that's the day when they're going to accept Christ. And that's when all the covenant that from this book and from other covenants that God made with Israel is going to be complete at that moment. The whole covenant of Abraham's covenant is going to be complete when that day when Israel surrenders to God, and then God's going to supernaturally, after Armageddon, deliver Israel. And then that's when God's going to set up his first kingdom. There's going to be two kingdoms God's going to set. First is the millennial kingdom, and then there's going to be the new heaven and new earth kingdom. But at this time, God's going to restore all the lands and everything that he promised to Abraham, and it's going to be all fulfilled. And this is right here, God is making a covenant with David, and that covenant is going to be fulfilled, that through Christ, his ancestry or his descendants will go on forever and reign. So through his promise.